You know that moment when someone asks, "So, what are you doing for your birthday?" And you feel this tiny pause inside your chest. Not because you forgot your plans, but because you don't really have any. Maybe you shrug and say, "Nothing special." Maybe you even laugh it off and add, "I don't really celebrate birthdays." And suddenly, people look at you like you just admitted you don't like puppies or sunsets. They assume something must be wrong, that you're sad or bitter or secretly lonely. But here's the thing most people miss. Not celebrating birthdays isn't always about disliking joy. Very often, it's about how your mind relates to time, attention, identity, and meaning. So if you're someone who doesn't celebrate birthdays, or you know someone who doesn't, let me walk you through what's really going on inside that psychology. Because it's a lot deeper, quieter, and more human than it looks from the outside. Let's start with the obvious assumption. Most cultures treat birthdays like checkpoints, little flags planted in time that say, "You exist, you matter, look how far you've come." Cake, candles, gifts, attention, all symbols saying this day is about you. So when someone opts out, people assume they're rejecting celebration itself. But psychologically, many people who don't celebrate birthdays aren't rejecting joy, they're rejecting performance. Think about it. Birthdays come with scripts. You're supposed to feel excited. You're supposed to be grateful. You're supposed to enjoy being the center of attention. For some brains, that spotlight feels warm and validating. For others, it feels loud, artificial, slightly uncomfortable. If your nervous system is more inward-focused, attention doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like pressure. Imagine being handed a microphone you didn't ask for and told, "Say something meaningful about your life." On cue, with an audience. For some people, that's thrilling. For others, it's exhausting. And that brings us to one of the biggest psychological patterns behind not celebrating birthdays: a low need for external validation. Some people's self-worth is deeply internal. They don't need dates, rituals, or social confirmation to feel real. Their sense of identity comes from continuity, not milestones. Your brain might think, "I didn't suddenly become someone new overnight. I'm still me. Why should today be different?" That doesn't mean you don't value yourself. It means your value doesn't fluctuate based on attention spikes. In psychology, this often shows up in people who score higher in self-reliance, introversion, or what researchers sometimes call internal locus of evaluation. You trust your own sense of meaning more than the crowd's reaction. So while others crave the reminder, "Hey, you're special today," your mind quietly replies, "I already know." Another layer sits even deeper, and it has to do with how you experience time. For many people, birthdays feel like progress markers. Another year older, another chapter closed, another step forward. But for some minds, time doesn't feel like a staircase. It feels like a river. If you're wired this way, slicing life into neat yearly segments feels arbitrary. Your brain experiences life as a flow of moments, not a series of levels unlocked. So a birthday doesn't feel like an achievement. It feels like Tuesday with frosting. In fact, research on time perception shows that people who are more reflective, philosophical, or future-oriented often feel less emotional attachment to calendar-based milestones. They think in narratives, not dates. And if that's you, birthdays can even trigger a subtle discomfort. Not sadness exactly, more like existential noise. You might catch yourself thinking, "What does another year even mean? Compared to what?" And suddenly the cake feels symbolic in a way you didn't ask for. There's also a group of people who avoid birthdays because of memory, not meaning. Birthdays aren't neutral days for everyone. For some, they're tangled up with childhood experiences, being forgotten, being forced to perform gratitude, family tension, or expectations that didn't match reality. Your brain is very good at pattern recognition. If birthdays once meant disappointment, pressure, or emotional confusion, your nervous system may quietly decide, "Let's not do that again." Not consciously, not dramatically, just gently opting out. And here's the key part. Avoiding birthdays doesn't mean you're stuck in the past. Often, it means you've learned how to protect your emotional energy. Your mind isn't saying, I don't deserve celebration. It's saying, I don't want my worth tied to a ritual that doesn't fit me. That's not weakness, it's discernment. Now, let's talk about something rarely mentioned, autonomy. Birthdays are one of the few days where other people feel entitled to plan for you. Surprises, expectations, social obligations disguised as kindness. If autonomy is important to you, if your sense of self is strongly tied to choice and control, birthdays can feel oddly invasive. You didn't choose the date, you didn't choose the traditions, yet you're expected to participate enthusiastically. So not celebrating can be a quiet way of reclaiming agency. It's your way of saying, I get to decide how my time, energy, and attention are spent, even today. There's also a personality dimension worth mentioning. People who don't celebrate birthdays often have a higher tolerance for emotional neutrality. They don't need highs to avoid lows. They're comfortable in the middle. Our culture loves peaks, big moments, big feelings, big displays. But some nervous systems prefer steadiness. Your joy doesn't come in fireworks. It comes in background warmth, a good conversation, a calm morning, a sense of alignment. From that perspective, birthdays can feel oddly mismatched, too loud for a mind that values quiet satisfaction. And here's where I want to gently challenge a common misconception. Not celebrating birthdays does not mean you don't value relationships. In fact, many people who skip birthdays value connections so deeply that they don't want it condensed into one performative day. They'd rather be appreciated randomly. They'd rather give love without waiting for a date. They'd rather exist in a relationship that doesn't need reminders. Your brain might think, if you care about me, you don't need a calendar prompt. That's not cold, that's idealistic. Of course, there's a flip side worth acknowledging with honesty. Sometimes avoiding birthdays can also be a way to avoid vulnerability. Letting people celebrate you means letting yourself be seen. And being seen, truly seen, can be uncomfortable. If you've learned to be self-sufficient early in life, attention can feel unfamiliar, even unsafe. So if part of you says, I just don't care about birthdays, it might be worth gently asking, or do I struggle to receive? Not to judge yourself, just to understand. Psychology isn't about labeling behavior as good or bad, it's about noticing patterns and asking why they make sense. And in this case, the why almost always makes sense. Whether it's autonomy, internal validation, time perception, emotional memory, or simple personality wiring, not celebrating birthdays is rarely random. It's a reflection of how your mind relates to meaning. So if this is you, here's the reframe I want to leave you with. You're not anti-joy, you're just selective. You don't reject celebration, you reject obligation disguised as happiness. And that's a deeply self-aware place to stand. You're allowed to define what matters. You're allowed to experience your life without punctuation marks. You're allowed to exist without candles proving it. And if you do celebrate in your own quiet way, by taking a walk, reflecting, doing nothing at all, that still counts. Because meaning isn't loud, it's personal. If this resonated with you, I'd love to know what birthdays feel like in your mind. Are they empty, peaceful, awkward, neutral? Share your experience in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the psychology behind everyday behaviors, the ones that make you quietly think, oh, that's me, stick around. There's a lot more of your mind worth understanding.